After the Revolution, the pursuit of equality increased. African Americans and women wanted rights as well. In 1776, the Continental Congress asked the colonies to draft their own constitutions so they could become states. Not all was well, though. There was too much freedom, and although many appreciated it, the gap of social inequality widened, and disunity was breeding. The Articles of Confederation were adopted in 1781, and they basically made the states a firm league of friendship. They kept up the ideal of union, but it was not practiced in reality. Two noteworthy things the Articles of Confederation did were the Land and Northwest Ordinances of 1785 and 1787, respectively. The Articles could not keep all states happy, as it hardly had any power to enforce rules. Shays' Rebellion was in 1786 in Massachusetts, led by Daniel Shays. He led many Revolutionary War veterans with immense debt and no way to pay. They tried to force the government to issue paper money, lighten taxes, and stop property takeovers. The Massachusetts government raised an army to fight the rebellion, and it was crushed almost instantly, but the effects lasted. Debtor relief laws were passed, and it was clear the Articles of Confederation would not suffice. 55 delegates met to draw up the Constitution. Originally, the plan had been to revise the Articles, but that did not happen. To appease both the large and small states, as well as the slave and free states, several compromises had to be made, such as the Great Compromise and Three-Fifths Compromise. Once the Constitution was submitted, two clear groups formed, the rich, comfortable Federalists and the poor, indebted Anti-Federalists. 4 states, Virginia, New York, North Carolina, and Rhode Island, did not want to ratify, but did when they realized they had no choice. In 1879, George Washington was unanimously elected president. He took his oath April 30th of that year. To ratify the Constitution, a promise for a Bill of Rights had been made to the Anti-Federalists. That was high on the to-do lists of Washington and the new government. James Madison wrote the first 10 amendments, and they were ratified in 1791. The Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, tried to fix the debt racked up under the Articles of Confederation by having the government assume the state debt as well as repay the loans with interest. The bill totaled over $50 million, and Hamilton became known as the father of the national debt. To find the money to pay all of this, he imposed tariffs, such as the one on whiskey. He also proposed a Bank of the United States. In 1794, the Whiskey Rebellion flared up over the tax on liquor. Washington stopped this rebellion with armed forces. Because of Hamilton's financial plans, the United States now has good credit. The French Revolution was a new focus in America that started dividing the citizens. The Jay Treaty also divided the Americans, as well as creating the Democratic-Republican Party. The next president was John Adams when Washington resigned after 2 terms. Adams inherited a large problem with France, though. After the Whiskey Rebellion and Jay's Treaty, France was upset because it seemed that there would be an alliance with Britain. This led to the XYZ affair. Adams was wise, though, and with the Convention of 1800 avoided the war. In the last few decades of the 16th century, as well as the early years of the 17th century, the Federalists passed many intolerable Alien Acts. Although the laws expired in 1801, the Jacksonians passed resolutions in Virginia and Kentucky, making the Alien and Sedition Acts unconstitutional. In the presidential campaign of the early 1800s between Adams and Jefferson, the practice of mudslinging began. Jefferson was elected on his policy against the Alien and Sedition Acts, as well as his belief that we are all Republicans, we are all Federalists. Adams' Midnight Judges Scandal, or Judiciary Act of 1801, enraged the Jeffersonians because it put Federalists almost all in charge of one branch of the government. The act was repealed in 1802. In 1800, Napoleon Bonaparte and Spain made a treaty. The Spaniards were to cede Louisiana to France. Instead of fighting for Louisiana, President Jefferson bided his time and thought. A plan was thought of in 1803. The Americans would buy New Orleans and other land for $10 million at most. If Napoleon wasn't willing to negotiate, the Americans would forge an alliance with Britain. The end result of the negotiations was that the U.S. Foreign Minister Robert Livingston was offered all of Louisiana for $15 million. Jefferson signed unwillingly, as he thought it was unconstitutional. In 1804, Jefferson authorized Meriwether Lewis and William Clark to explore the northern area received from the Louisiana Purchase. Aaron Burr, Jefferson's former vice president, tried to separate the Union, but failed when his plans were discovered. He was tried for treason, but not convicted. Meanwhile, France and Britain tried to punish each other and embroiled America in the conflict, by impressment, among other things. Jefferson put the Embargo Act in place, which cut off trade with all nations, hoping that Britain and France would stop abuse of America in exchange for trade to be opened back up. The American economy worsened, and citizens were enraged. They called it the Dambargo. To soften the blow, the act was replaced with the Non-Intercourse Act, which opened up trade to everyone but France and Britain. When this second act expired in 1810, just a year after it was passed, it was replaced with Macon's Bill No. 2. This bill stated that the first of either Britain or France to repeal their commercial restrictions would receive trade with America again, and the non-importation would be reinstated against the other nation. Napoleon saw his chance, and the embargo was placed against Britain, which Madison feared as the final step towards war. In 1812, President Madison entered war with Britain. During the War of 1812, Canada became the target of the poorly trained American army. Instead of attacking Montreal, a three-pronged invasion of Canada was launched and failed. Britain and America fought in the Battle of New Orleans, with America emerging victorious 2 weeks after a treaty had been signed. The end of the War of 1812 signaled a surge of nationalism. The Bank of the United States was revived, and the rebuilding of the capital started. Industrialism was on the rise, too. The Tariff of 1816 was implemented to stop the British from cornering the manufacturing market. Henry Clay backed the 1824 American system, also meant to boost the American market. The era of "good feelings" under Monroe took a turn for the worse in the Panic of 1819. The economy plummeted, and debts increased majorly. The West was hit especially hard. Monroe's Doctrine of 1823 featured non-colonization and non-intervention in foreign affairs. After Monroe finished his second term, there were 4 candidates to choose from for the presidency. The race came down to Jackson and John Quincy Adams. An upset Henry Clay, who was eliminated from the ballot, was in the House of Representatives as Speaker, and so, because their ideals aligned best, threw his support behind Adams. When he was elected president, Clay became Secretary of State. This came to be known as the corrupt bargain of 1824. The race to be the next president became quite dirty between Adams and Jackson, and mudslinging began to take on a new meaning. Jackson won and became the first Western president. He also introduced the spoils system, which rewarded political supporters with public office. Also under Jackson was the Trail of Tears. The Cherokee Indians of Georgia had adopted white culture, but to free the land for more westward expansion from whites, Jackson carried out their removal west of the Mississippi by the Indian Removal Act. Jackson also believed Vidal's Bank to be a monster. In 1832 came the Bank War. Webster and Clay tried to recharter the bank, but Jackson's veto stopped it. Clay and Jackson went at it for the presidency again in 1832, but Clay was beat by a landslide. In Jackson's second term, he slayed his monster, but the American economy was a casualty. It was not his problem, though, as his successor inherited the issue. The Whig Party formed, nominating William Henry Harrison, but Jackson's successor, Martin Van Buren, won. He felt the fury of Jackson's enemies, and although renominated, he was beat out by the Whigs' William Henry Harrison in the next year. By the 1840s, expansion west was very significant, and population doubled about every 25 years. Immigrants from Ireland and Germany came flooding in, and for the most part, Americans resented the gradual assimilation. It actually helped bring about the Industrial Revolution. Samuel Slater became known as the father of the factory system. The Industrial Revolution boomed with Eli Whitney's cotton gin. With inventions such as the National Road and the steamboat, food and other items were traded more readily, and the economy continued to blossom. With the railroad and transatlantic cable, communications continued to increase as well. American shipping was at an all-time high. All the increases led to women being given the tasks of homemaker and creating a serene environment for men to come home from work to. The Second Great Awakening in the 1850s revived religion. Instead of bringing believers together, however, it divided them into denominations. The Mormon faith, started in 1830 in New York's burned-over district by Joseph Smith, was bullied into leaving for seclusion in Utah. Also started in the early 1800s was the idea of a tax-supported public education. The Second Great Awakening also brought small colleges about as well as reform. People lobbied for education and jail improvements as well as prohibition and abolition. Women started being more vocal about their wish to vote, even going so far as to have a convention in Seneca Falls, New York, where they declared all men and women are created equal. Wilderness utopias started springing up out of outcast communities who had odd practices. Finally, writing and science continued to flourish with a distinctly American style.